You're standing in the Sistine Chapel. The year is 1501. Around you, cardinals draped in crimson silk fill the marble halls. Incense hangs thick in the air. You can taste it in the air. You can taste it. But something feels wrong. The bride approaching the altar is 13 years old. Her name is Lucrezia Borgia. Her father is Pope Alexander VI. And what's about to happen isn't just a wedding ceremony. Picture this: Rome, early 16th century. The most powerful religious institution on earth has transformed marriage into something that would make your blood run cold. Here's what history books won't tell you. Between 1492 and 1503, under Pope Alexander VI, Vatican wedding rituals incorporated practices that went far beyond anything recognizable as Christian ceremony. The documentation exists in scattered sources, Vatican archives that weren't meant to survive, letters from horrified observers, testimony from witnesses who broke their silence decades later. If you believe that the documented records of history's most disturbing truths must be remembered, consider liking this video and subscribing. Your support helps unearth more accounts from the darkest corners of the human story. What happened during these ceremonies wasn't just about marriage. It was about power. Complete, absolute, divinely sanctioned power over the human body and soul. Let me show you the machine. Act 1. The examination ritual. The process begins 3 days before the wedding. You're a young noblewoman, perhaps 15, maybe younger. Your family has arranged your marriage to strengthen political alliances with the Vatican. You've been told this is a sacred honor. They lead you to a private chamber in the Apostolic Palace. 3 women are waiting. They're called the matrones sacra, sacred matrons, church-appointed officials whose role is documented in Vatican administrative records from this period. Here's what makes this especially disturbing. The examination they conduct isn't medical. It's theatrical. According to testimony recorded by Johann Burchard, the papal master of ceremonies whose diary survived in the Vatican secret archives, these inspections served a dual purpose. First, to verify virginity, a requirement for noble marriages. Second, to establish the Church's absolute authority over the female body. Think about the psychology of this. You're a teenage girl. You've been raised to believe these people represent God's will on earth. When they tell you to undress, when they touch you, when they make you stand in positions that strip away every shred of dignity, you can't refuse. Because refusing the Church isn't just defying human authority. It's defying God Himself. The matrones sacra document everything. They describe your body in clinical detail. These descriptions are recorded, sealed, and delivered to the Pope himself. Here's what should terrify you about this system. It wasn't random. It wasn't individual abuse by corrupt officials. This was institutionalized, documented procedure with official titles, designated rooms, recorded protocols. Burchard's diary entry from November 1501 describes one such examination with disturbing precision. The language is bureaucratic, almost casual, like he's documenting a standard administrative task rather than systematic violation. The examination takes hours. By the time they finish, you understand something fundamental about your place in this world. Your body isn't yours. Your dignity isn't yours. Everything you are belongs to the institution that will shortly conduct your wedding. This is only the beginning. Act 2. The blessing of consummation. The wedding ceremony itself appears traditional. Vows, prayers, the exchange of rings. But what happens afterward crossed every conceivable line. You're led from the chapel to the camera nuptialis, the nuptial chamber. This isn't a private bedroom. It's a designated room within the Vatican itself, specifically prepared for what they call the blessing of the marriage bed. Here's where the documentation becomes fragmentary, but consistent. Multiple sources: Burchard's diary, letters from foreign ambassadors stationed in Rome, testimony recorded during later church investigations describe the same pattern. The priest doesn't leave after the ceremony. Picture yourself in this room. You and your new husband, likely a man you barely know, and standing at the foot of the bed, a high-ranking church official, sometimes a cardinal. Under Alexander VI, sometimes the Pope himself. They're not there to offer a brief blessing and depart. They're there to observe. According to Burchard's account of one such ceremony in 1501, the church official would recite specific prayers while the couple was expected to begin the physical consummation of their marriage. The prayers weren't brief. They lasted, according to time markers in the account, approximately 20 minutes. Think about what this does psychologically. This isn't about blessing. This is about establishing dominance, about demonstrating that even the most intimate human moment occurs under the church's surveillance and control. You can't protest. You can't ask them to leave, because this is the sacred ritual. This is God's will being enacted through His representatives. Some accounts describe the official approaching the bed during this ritual, touching the bride's head in blessing, placing hands on both participants. Here's what historians like John Julius Norwich and Sarah Bradford documented when analyzing this period. These practices served a political purpose. They bound noble families to the Vatican through bonds of shame and complicity. Families couldn't speak out against ceremonies they'd participated in. Silence became self-preservation. The ceremony continues until the priest determines it's complete. Only then are you alone with your husband. But you're not really alone, because now you understand there is no space in your life the church cannot enter. Act 3. The Banquet of Submission. What happened after the ceremony reveals the systematic genius of this psychological warfare. The next evening, there's a banquet. All the noble families who attended the wedding are present. Cardinals, ambassadors, Vatican officials, hundreds of witnesses. You're seated at the center of the high table, and during this banquet, the priest who conducted your ceremony rises to speak. According to Burchard's detailed account of one such banquet in October 1502, what the priest describes isn't a gentle blessing or words of congratulation. It's an explicit verbal description of the previous night's consummation ritual. Read that again. He describes what he witnessed, not it in euphemisms, in language specific enough that Burchard's original Latin text remains partially redacted in modern Vatican archives because scholars deemed it too graphic to publish unedited. Here's what makes this especially sinister. Everyone in the room knows what happened. Your parents, seated at the table, smile and nod as if this is normal. Other young brides who've been through the same ritual lower their eyes. Your husband sits beside you, silent. You can't leave. You can't object. You can't even show discomfort on your face. Because this is the celebration. This is the public confirmation that the ritual was successful, the marriage valid, the church's authority acknowledged. Think about the layers of control here. First, the private violation of the examination. Second, the observed consummation. Third, the public verbal description that ensures everyone knows the church's power is absolute. Any one of these would be traumatic. Together they form a machine designed to break the human spirit and rebuild it in submission. The banquet continues for hours. Music, dancing, elaborate courses of food. As if nothing unusual has occurred. Because in this world, nothing unusual has occurred. This is simply how things work when you marry into the church's sphere of influence. If this moment in history doesn't move you to learn more, you might be missing the lesson our ancestors tried desperately to teach. Act 4. The documentation they couldn't erase. Here's what haunts me about this story. We only know these details because of one man who couldn't stay silent. Johann Burchard was the papal master of ceremonies from 1483 to 1506. His job was to document every official Vatican function in precise detail. He wasn't a rebel or reformer. He was a bureaucrat who recorded what he saw with the same meticulous care, whether he was documenting a papal mass or a papal crime. His diary, titled Liber Notarum, survived because someone we don't know who hid the original manuscript instead of destroying it when the Vatican later tried to suppress these accounts. The manuscript wasn't discovered until the late 19th century, buried in a private collection in Strasbourg. Think about that timeline. These rituals occurred in the early 1500s. The full documentation wasn't available to historians until nearly 400 years later. How many other ceremonies happened that we have no record of? How many other brides experienced this whose stories were successfully erased? Burchard's account mentions these rituals occurring at least 12 times under Alexander VI alone. 12 documented ceremonies. Alexander was pope for 11 years. Here's what historians like Eamon Duffy and Michael de la Bedoyere have noted. Burchard's account is considered reliable because he documents dozens of other events that have been verified through independent sources. When he says something happened, there's no evidence he fabricated or exaggerated, but even Burchard couldn't document everything. There are references in his diary to the usual preparations, and as before when describing these wedding rituals, suggesting they happened so frequently they became routine, normal, unremarkable, the bureaucratization of horror. Act 5. The legacy of silence. Here's the question nobody asks. Why didn't the family speak out? You're a powerful, noble family. Your daughter was subjected to these rituals. Why maintain silence? The answer reveals the genius of the system. First, complicity. By participating in the ceremony, by attending the banquet, by accepting the marriage as valid, you've implicated yourself. Speaking out means admitting what you allowed to happen to your own daughter. Second, spiritual terror. In 16th century Europe, the church isn't just a political institution. It controls access to salvation itself. Speaking against the Vatican means risking excommunication, eternal damnation, not just for you, but for your entire family line. Third, practical power line. The church controls wealth, land, political appointments. Crossing them means losing everything. So families stayed silent. Daughters stayed silent. Even the husbands stayed silent. And the rituals continued. Until they didn't. Here's what changed. Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. In 1517, 16 years after the ceremonies I've described, Luther posted his 95 Theses. Among his many criticisms of church corruption were veiled references to impure rituals and violation of the marriage sacrament. Historians debate whether Luther knew specific details about these Vatican wedding ceremonies, but the timing is suspicious. As the Reformation spread and the church faced existential threats, these practices quietly disappeared. Not because of moral awakening, because of political necessity. The Vatican couldn't afford these scandals becoming public while fighting to maintain its authority across Europe. So the ceremonies stopped. The documentation was hidden or destroyed. The witnesses died taking their secrets to graves. And for 400 years, history books taught that Vatican weddings were beautiful, sacred, purely ceremonial events. The truth they tried to bury stand in the Sistine Chapel today. Look at those magnificent frescoes, the soaring architecture, the profound beauty, and know that in rooms just down the hall from where Michelangelo painted the ceiling, teenage girls were subjected to systematic violation, dressed up as holy ritual. Here's what keeps me awake about this story. These weren't isolated incidents by corrupt individuals. This was institutional policy, official protocol, documented procedure with designated roles and standardized practices. The church didn't just tolerate abuse. It ritualized it, formalized it, made it sacred. That's not corruption. That's something far more disturbing. That's what happens when an institution combines absolute spiritual authority with zero accountability. When questioning becomes heresy. When silence becomes survival. The families who participated weren't weak or immoral. They were trapped in a system where every option led to destruction. Either destroy your daughter's dignity or destroy your family's future. Most chose the only rational choice available in an irrational system. They participated. They smiled at the banquets. They kept silent. The lessons we still haven't learned. Here's what should terrify you about this history. These practices flourished not in some dark age of ignorance, but during the Renaissance, the supposed rebirth of learning and culture. In the same years that Michelangelo was painting the Sistine Chapel and Leonardo was creating timeless art. Beauty and horror existing simultaneously, culture and cruelty intertwined. The Vatican that commissioned the Pieta also institutionalized the violation of teenage brides. Both are true. Both are documented. Both are part of the same historical reality. We prefer to remember the beauty, to fill our history books with art and architecture and cultural achievement. But the horror was just as real, just as systematic, just as carefully documented until someone tried to erase the documentation. Johann Burchard's diary survived by accident, a single manuscript hidden by an unknown person for unknown reasons. How many other truths didn't survive? How many other ceremonies, other rituals, other systematic abuses were successfully erased from history? We'll never know, but we know this one. We have the documentation, we have the testimony, we have proof that can't be denied. And that means we have a responsibility, not to look away, not to dismiss it as ancient history, not to focus only on the beauty and ignore the horror, but to remember, to understand that institutions without accountability will abuse their power, that silence protects perpetrators, not victims, that rituals and traditions and claims of divine authority can disguise systematic evil. These lessons aren't ancient, they're eternal. Every time we see an institution, religious, political, corporate, operating without transparency and accountability, we should remember the Vatican wedding rituals. Every time we hear "this is how we've always done things" used to defend questionable practices, we should remember the matrone sacra conducting their examinations in official Vatican chambers. Every time someone says you can't question this authority, we should remember the teenage brides who couldn't refuse because refusal meant damnation. The system relied on silence, so speaking becomes resistance. The final truth: in 1983, the Vatican opened parts of its secret archives to researchers. Among the documents made available were portions of Burchard's diary, though many sections remain restricted. Historians who've accessed these documents report that the full extent of Alexander VI's papal court activities is even more disturbing than published accounts suggest. But Vatican officials continue to classify certain records as too sensitive for public access. Translation: there are still secrets being kept, still documentation being hidden, still truths that someone has decided we're not ready to know. Here's what I know for certain. The rituals I've described are documented fact. The examination procedures, the observed consummations, the public banquet descriptions, all confirmed through multiple independent sources. What we don't know is the full scope. 12 documented ceremonies under one pope. But how many other popes? How many other decades or centuries? How many other variations of these rituals occurred in different times and places? The Vatican archives contain approximately 53 miles of shelving. Most of it remains restricted. Somewhere in those 53 miles of documentation are truths that would rewrite our understanding of church history. Accounts of rituals we can't imagine. Testimony from victims whose names we'll never know. Maybe someday those archives will open completely. Maybe someday we'll know the full truth. Until then, we have Burchard's diary. We have the fragments that survived. We have enough evidence to know that what happened behind the Vatican's sacred walls was anything but sacred. And we have a choice. We can focus on the soaring architecture and beautiful art and tell ourselves that's the real Vatican history. Or we can acknowledge that institutions built on absolute power will always abuse that power. That claims of divine authority don't prevent human cruelty, they enable it. That the teenage brides who endured these rituals deserved better than centuries of silence. They deserved witnesses who spoke out, families who protected them, a church that actually practiced the mercy it preached. They got none of that. The least we can do is remember. to refuse to let their suffering disappear into convenient historical amnesia, to say their names when we know them, to acknowledge their experiences even when documentation is fragmentary, to understand that every magnificent cathedral and priceless artwork was created by the same institution that systematized the violation of powerless girls and called it holy. Both truths matter. Both truths are real. And only by holding both in our minds simultaneously can we understand what institutions become when power meets zero accountability. If this exposed something you've never heard before, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're going to keep uncovering the history they tried to erase. Drop a comment with your thoughts on how institutions should be held accountable, and I'll see you in the next investigation.